So you're an English professor. Are there any writers who really deal with this topic of Magis head on?
Many of these writers, if we look closely at their work, are really deeply wrestling with questions of spirituality. And while the ultimate answers, I think conscientious people of faith would concede the point that we don't have the ultimate answers. Faith is all about sort of that wrestling, that questioning, that process, as far as I'm concerned. That process is especially what's important, that we keep questioning, prodding, challenging ourselves. And maybe that has something to do with the more Magis as well.
So if we look at writing as a process where we're constantly reworking, re-editing things, how does that relate to Magis?
Well, writing is, I think, a great example, because I think any professional writer who's worth his or her salt would tell you the job of writing is never done.
Yeah.
I know I've studied writers like Frank O'Connor, the Irish short story writer, who would take a story that he had published and then tinker with it some more. He would feel like he wasn't ever finished with it. So there's something potentially sort of frustrating about that. But at the same time, I think with writing especially, need to sort of keep pushing ourselves. The key to good writing, as far as I'm concerned, is rereading, not just sort of doing something once and being done with it, but returning to it. And that process, which is also a long-standing Jesuit practice of being reflective, of going back over your experiences. If you're going to do writing well, you're going to be doing that. You're going to be following that process of going back and, I suppose, in a way, pushing yourself a little bit further to achieve that greater good.
So you talked a little bit about Sister Kerrigan, who you worked with during graduate school. Did she ever show you Magis?
I don't see sort of Magis as a term that exists in isolation, but when I'm talking about Magis, I see it in relation to cura personalis. I see it in relation to the idea of finding God in all things. There's a way in which she is deeply able to sort of see and bring out the best in the people that she interacts with. In her positive way of being, there's something that was deeply inspirational to me, that draws people in, and I think inspires people to want to be, I suppose, the best that they can be. It's that quality especially that stands out to me about her.
So your grandfather was a great influence in your life. Did he ever show you Magis?
His example in those years and his example thereafter really inspired me a great deal, because he was very deeply Catholic, and having read some of the journals that he left behind and reflecting on those, he wasn't an educated man at all. Seamus Heaney's poem Digging, that a lot of students know and connect with, is one that I often think about in my experiences with him, because he's somebody who worked all his life on the railroad, and part of his story, at least the part of his story that I knew best, John, was that as he was finishing his 50 years and as he was getting a watch as the small reward that the Reading Railroad gave him for all those years that he put in, he and his wife were looking forward to his retirement and all the joys that might come of that. My grandmother passed away in 1976. I was 5 years old, just at the time that he was retiring. And so he was left with a deep crisis in his life, and something that could have rocked him and made him cynical and made him, I suppose, turn away from all the things that had kept him faithful. And at a time that was one of the most challenging times in his life, if not the most challenging, my grandmother having contracted cancer and in a very quick span of time passing away, he made a life decision, and my mother and father made a life decision, that he would come to live with us. And so from 1976 until the time that I moved away in 1994, he lived in the house with us and was really a second father and a hugely anchoring figure for me, and somebody who, whenever I had any questions, he was so approachable and so good, and the person that I could turn to. I always knew that he was going to be on my side. I always knew that he was somebody who was going to give me a straight answer and who I could have really good conversations with.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kerrigan. And this has been Magis.